Welcome back to Building Out Loud, a weekly podcast with me, Randy Silver,
Faith Forster.
And every week we follow Faith's journey in building out Discoveree, her new startup. And this week we have a special guest. Please introduce yourself, special guest.
Hey guys, I'm Rags and I'm the co-founder of another startup called Floto. I come from a background in product, having built product at Google and Meta and multiple different startups. And now I'm on the entrepreneurial journey myself, building out a startup to bring feedback into the product building process.
And we invited Rags on this week because he is a beta tester of Discoveree. So let's start at the beginning. Faith, how did the two of you meet? How did you recruit Rags into the beta program?
So we met at the lunch that was hosted by Anton, the founder of Lovable, a few weeks ago. So there was a number of people there who were all either AI engineers or product leaders who have been vibe coding, about 12 of us in total. Rags was in my discussion group when we were talking about the future of product development. But when we met, Rags talked about the tools that he's built to help designers create real-time feedback, bringing personas to life during the design process, which I thought was super cool. And then likewise, when I talked about Discoveree, what I was trying to do, he was like, oh, that sounds amazing. Can I try it out?
So, Rags, every week I talk to Faith, and she tells me how it's going, and I hear about the build, and I got my login just this past week and started playing around, but you've been a little more active than I have as a beta tester, and you're coming from the outside. What's your impression been so far? Why did you want to get involved, and how has it been? Give us some feedback.
Yeah, actually, just to start where Faith ended, when we were talking about it, it was the same thing. I was like, okay, I'm a founder. I am doing a million things right now. The thing that I want to be doing a lot more about is actually not just building products, but thinking about how do I actually take them to market, right? Like all of the PM stuff, if you will. And when she was telling me about Discoveree, I was like, okay, this seems like a tool that I should be using, right? And so I've actually been banging on the door trying to get a login. And I think it was almost like last Thursday or so that I actually got mine in also. But it was great timing because I actually have a live problem that I'm working through. We have a new product and I'm figuring out what should be my growth approach, what should be my strategy. So yeah, I have spent the last few days using Discoveree to see how it can actually help me like today, right? To do the things that I need to do to take a product to market. So it's been pretty cool so far.
Let's start with the good side. What have you found? What have you learned?
The thing that stands out to me after having used it a few times is that this feels different from other AI tools, right? I mean, the first thing that I'm thinking about is I'm also using Claude Cowork as part of my daily, like everybody does. But there's something about this that I think this morning I was trying to put my finger on where this actually feels more of a thinking partner and less of an AI tool. And I got to that point from a strange point of frustration, actually, because, with ChatGPT, right, you're used to it telling you, okay, can I give you 3 more things? And can I give you 2 more things after every conversation? I was doing a strategy discussion in the app and I wasn't getting forward because I was getting more and more questions getting asked. Wait, but before we go there, can you think about this, right? And then it kind of started to dawn on me that there's this deliberate slowing down of the process, which is really great because it is actually then forcing me to say, before I jump to seeing an answer or something that I can go and act on, have I thought through all of the things that I need to think through? And so that process has actually been really great. That's the top behavioral kind of thing, is like it's feeling like something that somebody who's working with me to help me think through, and then kind of like, it's that thinking partner. So I think that would be, I would say, like the biggest sort of like revelation for me from initial use of the product.
Faith, was that something you've done intentionally?
Yeah, it is. The way that I asked the agents to be set up was so that it was really challenging and questioning assumptions. It's meant to be acting as a peer and working with you and challenging you and providing advice to help you really think things through well. I'm so happy it's come across that way. I can't tell you how happy that makes me to hear that.
And did it change any of your thinking, Rag, so far, and challenge any of your assumptions, or did you find yourself learning anything from this?
Both, actually. So as an example, there's a section in the app around goals, right? It took 2 minutes for me to figure things out, but once you do, it's like, okay, oh, cool. So we have a goal that's this is what we want to get to kick off our revenue, etc. So I plugged this stuff in, and actually the next conversation was much more about, do you think that this is an achievable goal? And my initial impression was like, wait, like my log is pretty interesting, because I was like, hey, I'm a startup founder, we need to be aggressive, and then it kind of like adjusted back and said, actually, no, it wasn't about telling me that this was a good goal or not, but it was actually really kind of like, okay, where we landed is the thing where it said we can get there, but here are the steps you need to do, right? Start with founder-led sales. Then you need to put together like B2B sort of motion, blah, 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 like the steps that you did. And I think where I was, I mean, we're running so fast. So is Faith, right? I'm just focused on, okay, that's the goal. Let me plonk it there. Let's start. What that session is actually starting to do is, at least, even if not filling the gaps, telling me these are the gaps that you need to fill. So even if you don't fill it today, just make sure that you are thinking about it, right? So in that sense, it's really cool. Like, I think, I don't know, again, Faith, who would be the target best audience for it? But I can tell you that there is certain utility for somebody like myself where it's actually adding guardrails, right? It's not telling me you can't do anything, but it's saying this is what you need to do to get to the best outcome, which in a sense is mimicking what a really, really good product manager or the best PMs that I have seen, that's the way they operate.
What do you think, Faith? How does that feel?
It was amazing to hear that. It really does. So I've also used it for myself for Discoveree, and there has definitely been moments. We were talking about the growth strategy of the business and how we're going to set certain goals. They're quite aggressive. How are you going to achieve those? And one of the things I mentioned was we will need to get into the US market at some point. And it's not a market I have much connection to at all. And so I was like, well, how are you going to do that? I'm like, I don't know. And it exactly as Rag said, it was like, okay, this is going to be an area you need to focus on. We don't necessarily have the answers yet, for something to think about later. And so it then creates a strategic initiative where you can think about that a little bit later. But I did exactly the reaction Rags has had. I had that with my own product, where I was like, in a way, it's something I was vaguely aware of. I guess in the back of my mind, it certainly wasn't front of attention. But it's useful to have a conversation where that comes out. You understand the pieces. You don't necessarily have to have them fully planned or understood or even be executing, but you at least know that those pieces are there. And so you can then address those when you're ready. I think that in itself is really valuable. It's a way of helping people really think through not only what's possible, but the practical steps, what it is you're going to have to do to get there. And that's something that can then be, you do have a co-founder, but for me, it's just me. Like, I was just trying to think this through myself. And so actually having had the opportunity to bounce that off and then understand that and leave it there, knowing it's not a priority right now, it's something I would need to think about, means that as I'm having conversations along the way with different people, I'm asking, like, I spoke to someone not long after I did that session last week who has had a very, very successful exit. And so I was asking him, like, if you were me, what would you do to launch into the US market? And so it's just a way of really thinking through the gap between the vision and what you're trying to achieve, the practical steps of getting there, but actually helping you form that plan in between and connect the dots.
So, Rags, I know you've also given Faith some bugs that you found. What have you found? What's been a little bumpier?
Some of the things that have been, these are growing pains bugs that I love, that when our beta testers give me, right? Like, I was trying to upload something, an error message popped up, but I just WhatsApped it to Faith, like, I don't know, 30 minutes later, she's like, updates are done. There have been growing pains kind of stuff, right? And I think Faith's building this on Replit, right? I mean, with my own vibe coding, I know that for application this complex, I make something, I go into some section, some variable isn't set, and there's an error that pops up, right? And I think there was another one of those that I sent over to Faith, but this is like, those are technical issues, right? The one thing I would say is, I think the onboarding was chat-based. It's very natural. But there are moments where I was like, actually, like, for instance, like when you sign up, you put in your URL. And when you come in, one of the first questions is about, tell me about your business, right? I think there are opportunities there where you can, like, once I finish this and I come in, I know that you've already gotten so much information about that. So one suggestion is actually to layer that or highlights of that already into the onboarding, because it felt like it could be like a 10-minute thing where I'm giving you information, or it could be like a 2-minute thing where I'm just confirming or editing, right? So that was one place where it was just, I made a mental note to myself, like, okay, I have seen other experiences where with AI, they're making this a lot more faster, smoother. I do want to mention the other side of it before we forget, which is like, there have been a couple of wow moments, right? For me, as I've been using it. And one of it was this morning when I logged in. I was checking out, I mean, I'm still not fully familiar. So I was on the on my dashboard, and there was this thing that says, I don't know what exactly it's called, Faith, but they found an update, which was essentially Google had launched something that could actually be an event. That is a feature that I would pay money for. Because essentially what it is it just found that something got launched that could affect me. Because a competitor has launched something that, and today, with all of the time we're just spending with AI trying to stay on top of what we're building, that sort of competitor analysis is almost impossible to do, right? Now, agents can do it, but then spinning up all of that stuff thing. But what is actually, I should say, the thing that makes it a really wow wasn't just that. Underneath that section, there was like this, recommendations or whatever, that had also been updated on what I should be considering because this competitor now has something else, right? Or at least I felt like that connection was there. So that's pretty awesome actually. If this can happen on a continual basis, right? And as in when I'm updating the knowledge I'm putting in, let's say I pick a growth strategy, right? And this is a channel I want to go to, immediately letting saying this is a crowded channel or hey, somebody else has used this channel and they've done X, Y, and Z. Man, that actually is very, very actionable. So Faye, that was pretty awesome actually. And the other one, there is a section where you give me product recommendations. That is very cool because that is actually, it's layered almost looks like a 2x2, but it seems like it's not just random recommendations. It's comparative feature comparison to a few competitors that have been identified. And it kind of gives me especially there is one quadrant which says parity features I need to build, etc. This is the kind of stuff these are things that as a PM you would do, but you would typically do it once at some phase of your thing and you would forget, right? Or do something about it. 3 days later, that's invalid. So when you pick it up 6 months later, but this is kind of core in some sense, right? To building amazing products. So I think that is another amazing feature. The one thing I would say that I would like there is for each of these recommendations, I only have the current options, just say, put it onto my roadmap or create something. What I would like to do is an option to just dive on each of them with your agent, right? So if I just can click, open up your site and say okay, whoa, because the first thought that comes to my mind is whoa, what is this, right? Or why is this important? And I think that conversation, if I could have, and then at any point, once I say, okay, like you said, either this is important for me to do, or I can file away for the future, right? And this is a section, honestly, where I can see myself coming back again and again because the pace of feature development today is in days, right? So in a week, my products are going to look different, which means that actually the competitive threats for my product are going to look different. And I think product management has just not even grokked, it's nowhere close to catching up to this world in which we are really working. So yeah, that was really cool.
That's awesome. I'm now realizing I need to explain this within the product experience. So for context, I just gave Rags a login. I didn't tell him anything about what the product does or features, or I didn't give him any demo because it's supposed to be self-guided and really support you through the process. But I've just realized I haven't explained anywhere the concept of opportunities, which I need to bake into this somehow. Those recommendations, you can turn those into an opportunity, and that opportunity is the space to then understand the problem statement, understand what you can do, work through potential solutions before Fantastic. You add it to the roadmap.
I did add one into an opportunity, but I haven't explored that section. I shall do that. Good to know.
Yeah. So that's the point of that section is you can do some investigation or discovery on the opportunity before you commit to actually doing it or not.
Rags, we also want to talk to you about what the experience has been like for you building something. You've got a long history in product management, long before doing things with Cloud Code, with LLMs, AI-assisted development was a thing. One thing before we get into the specifics of how you build these days, you just talked about the life cycles or the feedback cycles, the development cycles. This is something that's come up a lot lately with people. We've got annual plans, we've got quarterly goals and OKRs, we've got 2-week sprints. These are traditional things, and they're based around the rhythms of financial reporting and planning. They're also based on the fact that we just needed time to do stuff in the past, but this has changed so radically. What are you seeing? What is an optimal life cycle for you right now, or a dev cycle? Are you measuring it in weeks and days and hours and in breaths?
Great question, actually. What we are currently doing, and I don't know if this is right or wrong or optimal, is we have a weekly cycle, and you can think about it as a sprint cycle, right? We don't have any quarterly planning or anything like that because that is just pointless, honestly. And so we do weekly cycles, and we typically try to aim for a release every week, right? So that's the anchor to say, okay, this is what we need to do. So we work backwards from that. So we start, my co-founder and I, typically on a Sunday or over the weekend, we would just catch up and say, okay, what do we want to do next week? And that we just anchor that. And then we say, let's just put a release. And actually we optimize to have a release. So we're not looking for perfection. So if stuff works, we just release it. We'll make the trade-offs that we do. But the more interesting thing that's happened is our sequencing. Design, development is doesn't make any sense, right? So few things, right? One, we don't write PRDs anymore because it's too slow. I've started to write something called a product experience document. In fact, I think I shared a copy of one of those with Faith. So essentially, I'm describing the experience the user needs to have. And the reason our development process is a bit inverted now, we start with engineering. So we just say, hey guys, build this. Build a prototype, but they're building live. They're not building throwaway prototypes, right? They're using Claude Code or whatever. And we're just saying like, there's very little guardrails. Just build this so that we can see what's possible. We play with it as a team. And then once we say, okay, this looks good, we then bring it into design. And so our designer and me will then say, okay, this is what we're going to ship. This is the experience. Now, how can we make sure that it looks, feels like what we want to build, etc.? And then the final loop is essentially it gets designed and goes back to engineering to say, guys, you need to update this, right? It's a little bit of an inverted cycle.
We used to be, we want you to build something that does this. This is the optimal experience. Now you're saying, what is the art of the possible? We have no idea what you can do.
Exactly.
Tell us show us what you can do, and then we'll try and shape that into a good experience.
You nailed it. That exactly is what it is, right? Because we tried to do this, as a PM, if I sit and spec it, I give it to them and it's out the door, bad way or a good way. Like my engineer or my CTO would look at it and he would tell me that, wait, what you're asking me is like very little because we can actually do a lot more. And I'm like mind blown. And so we did a few of these and we're like, you know what? I am the weakest link here, so I'm just going to get myself out of the process here. I will take what we're hearing from customers. I will craft it into like hey, I think we need to build this. And then we build it and we look at it, we play for it. And some of these we can just launch, right? And then we will get the feedback and we will then.
So your job as CEO and essentially CPO is set the goalpost. This is where we're trying to get to, set the ambition, and it's their job to show you how they can get there, whether they can exceed it.
And there's one other thing I would add, actually, as my job as a CPO here is this way overused word, but taste. I don't call that taste in a good or bad way, but essentially what I hold the stewardship of here is the experience, let's call it that, right? Because the danger here is that you basically can build a Frankenstein before you know it. 3 engineers, each of them in parallel in a week, building a completely different thing, and everybody puts it in a build and they give it to you, and you go, whoa, like this thing is going all over the place, right? So my job, for example, we had this is the exact example where like we have this little small thing where there's connectors to Notion, Jira, Linear, and then there's like export to Claude, blah, blah, blah. And that whole thing has become like a 2-line mess, right? Because people have just been, where is the space to add it? Let me just put a button. And so essentially when it comes back, before things ship, what I am doing and what I'm working with my designer. So we have a small team. It's like me, my designer, 3 engineers, right? And essentially what we are putting is that kind of hard experience layer. Like, okay, this is crap. Like, let's just design it so that it is still, we have a certain perspective of how the product should look like. Yeah, the role is changing. It's a lot more editing. That's a word, right? Like, I am actually that editor who's making the final cut of the movie, but I'm getting like all 6 raw shots, right? And that's what it's becoming. Earlier, I could have thought of myself as a director, right? Where I'm going to tell you exactly how to shoot that. Those days are gone, honestly.
So both of you are obviously very experienced in much larger companies, but now, Faith, you're doing this on your own. Rags, you've got a 6-person team over at Floto. Does this scale? Can you do this kind of pace with a lot more people?
I don't think that you can do that with a lot more. Traditionally, right? What has happened is people have built these like 2 pizza teams or whatever. And the way they've scaled it is they build multiple teams up to a level and then it just blows up, right? Like you need like layers of management, etc. I think right now it doesn't scale with people the same way, but it scales with agents. And I think that's what you're going to say. What Faith's building is something like that, right? Like I can scale myself now to get like a strategy and a GTM and all of that stuff if I was working in this app or wherever, like similar things where I can do a lot more that I don't need the people interaction to do, right? But what I'm also seeing, Randy, is I'm talking to designers because they're our ICP. And within product teams, like designers are now being asked to directly start getting into the code, do prototypes, etc. So teams are also trying to figure it out, right? But I think one thing is very true. Smaller teams are probably going to do like 3, 4, 5x of what an equivalent team could do when we were doing more traditional product management.
The question on scale, it is something that I've been thinking about and wondering, and I don't have the answers for it yet. I've been thinking about what my own team might look like when I get this to a certain point. I have got some engineering help at the moment, and it's making me realize how much more I would like an engineer to do if I had the capacity. And, we're not too far off this being in production and being used by a number of organizations. It needs to be production ready, stable, and reliable in that sense. And so it is something I've been wondering about, how you would shape that team. And I hope that I can keep the team small. I think by nature, we're looking for opportunities to automate based on what we're doing. And so I do think it's very different to a year or two ago where you would be trying to do a massive raise and just bring on people. I think it's a very different game to that now. But there still is some value, and it's interesting to hear Rags talk about it. I was also talking to Anya from Autogen about a week ago, Saras from Jack and Jill. So these are all AI native businesses. And one of the things I've been asking them is, how does their team work? How have they shaped their team? And what does that look like? And interestingly, there is still a role, I think, for PMs and engineers and designers. I was surprised to hear that. There's still that shape within the teams, but they're taking on wider sets of responsibilities than what I think you would have traditionally found in businesses. So I don't think that fundamentally changes. And there is a lot of discussion about those roles merging and that people need to do everything. And I kind of get it, like you can. Don't think that necessarily means you should, because you're not necessarily the best person to be doing those things. And I think where you've got the opportunity to have people who are the best at doing those things, then you should. While it's still evolving and a lot of people are still really experimenting with that, I'm not sure that that will fundamentally change outside of just being able to take away some of the handoffs, which were never a good thing. There is, I think, an interesting comment about what Rags was saying around the joined up experience, because that has always been a problem when you've got multiple product teams working on one product. It was a pretty big problem for us at Wise. And that's also something that AI is not good at. You can't just say, look, this is the template, use it across all the product. It kind of wants to do its own thing every time. Again, you have to really sort of force it, say, no, we've got this format, we've got this experience, use it again. Like, don't go off piste, which it wants to do. And so I think there is something really not solved in that space around having consistency in that experience, which as humans, we need.
When you talk about bringing in and still having a designer, an engineer, a product manager, maybe even a delivery person, whatever it is, I'm not so sure it's always about the skill sets anymore, but about the biases and the attitudes that we bring to it. And it's the different ways that we work with tools and the attitude that we bring to things that makes all the difference. But that is shaped by all of our experience. And it's going to be fascinating to see people coming up that haven't had 10, 20 years doing something certain ways, developing those attitudes and refining them, and how they're going to use things and what the next generation is going to look like with all this.
Yeah, actually, one last comment on that. My co-founder and I, we met at our first job, right? So both of us we're old guys, right? But we actually, the rest of our team, we're actually hiring people with relatively zero experience, right? We just hire people straight out of college. Or it's a 6-person team. I can't generalize, right? But there's a deliberate reason why we actually chose to do that, and it sits somewhere in what you're saying, Randy, because I think people who have learned how to do things in a certain way, actually there's a challenge where they need to unlearn before they can relearn, right? And contrary to this kind of thing where there's going to be no jobs for juniors, etc., that's the other thing that we are seeing across professions. Actually, what we're finding is somebody with no preconceived notion of what's possible, right? And who has actually in some sense been AI native because they've been using these tools in college. These guys have been writing essays for the last 2 years using ChatGPT. You talk to people, they're actually very, very savvy, right? They've found their way around homeworks and all that kind of stuff. And so there's something that we are finding that in terms of just the speed with which they do things, no is never an answer, because for them, they're okay, how do we do it becomes the next thing. And they'll just go ask Claude or ChatGPT, right? And they will get 3 things. They'll pick one and go. And we kind of look at our company as founders, our role is to be the guardrails, where to say, okay, some of these things are going to take you off piste. So let's just stay in, but let's just experiment, right? What I've told people when we hired them is actually failing is not failure, right? Actually not failing is failure here. You've got to keep trying things. So that's the other aspect that's going to change, right? You're going to have people in teams who are at various levels of AI proficiency or comfort. And that's going to be another thing I think that's going to influence how, you're looking at these things where they're apparently Meta is asking all PMs to re-interview to be AI PMs. That would be unthinkable, right? You've passed the first interview, you're amazing.
Yeah, I don't even know where to start with that one. The meta interview process and the experience of being a PM there, very different than most people I talk to, but absolutely fascinating to see where they're going to go with it. Rags, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we close out, Faith, what's gone on in the last week? What should we look forward to next week?
Well, as you can tell, I've got the beta version out now. So I've gone back to the 70 odd people who are part of alpha and said, would you like to be part of beta? And had quite a number of them say, yes, please. And I do offer to do a call and talk them through it, but everyone generally has been like, just give me a login and I'll have a play. So, yeah, that's quite cool. I think kind of supports the premise that I built the product on, is that people should just be able to get going with this. You shouldn't have to have a sales process or someone supporting them through that. So I am getting lots of feedback through quite a few bugs that are still left over from the Replit issues that I had a week or so ago. So getting through those. And then interestingly, as well as the beta testers, I started reaching out to some people I know at private equity firms who have a portfolio of tech businesses, because that was one of my hypotheses, that would be a target audience. And I've had two come back already saying, yes, please, can I have a play? I'd like to be part of beta, which is cool. So for the next week, it's a lot of it's just tidy up, make sure the product's working well and supporting and having conversations with those people, getting some feedback. And I'm not sure. It's actually kind of getting real and a bit scary. I was like, I actually need to get this thing into production and working well, and think about, I haven't even registered a business yet. I probably have to register a business so I can set up an account so I can take payments. There's things like that. I'm just going to go, oh, it's a tipping point now. It's going from being an experiment to being a real business. And I have to say, I'm kind of going, oh, do I want to do this? Do I want a business? Anyway, it's something to work through, I guess.
Stage fright. Fantastic. We can definitely talk about that one in a future episode, and I look forward to that. We'll talk again next week, Faith. And Rags, thank you again so much for joining us this week. It's been great.
Thank you for having me. It's been amazing.